Welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! History with Giorlando. In today's video, I'm going to try something new out. I've never done a video like this before, but I'm going to try my best to break down a recent match that I played over on Pack Official TCG's Twitch stream. This was a match that occurred last week, right before I recorded the video for the Giargia deck that I recently posted, so you'll actually see me run Brandon Wigley's full Giargia deck list from the top 64 of the 2014 North American World Championship qualifiers. You will see Pack play his Mermail Atlantean deck, emphasizing the Gen X Undyne engine. It was a really interesting match. I'm going to try my best to play through his stream and break down the match to the best of my ability, use my recollection of some of the decision points, some of my mistakes, some of the reads that we were making back and forth, and hopefully you'll enjoy this video. Obviously, over the course of the past 40-something videos, every single match has been with Dueling Book, but luckily I've had the opportunity of occasionally playing remote duels using some old formats, a few times with Pack over on his Twitch. I highly recommend checking out his Twitch channel. For those of you who play modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, there is just a wealth of knowledge over on his channel. He breaks down his plays with great depth. It's really a fantastic channel if you have any interest in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, and he does occasionally play some retro Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. I've seen him play 2011 format with the likes of Jesse Cotton. He's played 2011 format with me before. Here, of course, we're playing 2014. So I really highly recommend checking out his Twitch stream. I'll put links down below in the description. I don't usually use the description, something I'm typically lacking on, but I will definitely make a comment down below in the description linking you over to his Twitch. It's really awesome. Anyway, let's take a look at this match. So I'm going to play this with 2 playback speed. So I'm not going to actually have the sound from the original match. You can go over to his Twitch and actually watch this in his videos. I think you can do that. I'm not 100% positive, but under the impression that you can do that. This way we'll kind of expedite some of the thinking process that happened in real time. We were also talking back and forth, so this will make it so that we primarily focus on the gameplay. I had the opportunity of going first. I won the die roll, which is obviously a big advantage. We're playing with 6 cards instead of 5. That change actually occurred in 2014 where the turn player skipped their draw phase, but we're playing Nationals format, which means we are in fact going to draw 6. I had a pretty strong opening hand. I opened up Wiretap, Giargia Gear, and Giargia Arm. I forget the other trap card. This is a really ideal opening hand. Now against Mermail's, Wiretap is a little bit of a liability going second, but going first it's actually really useful. This deck theoretically is only going to have Abyss Spear and then a handful of other traps. Pack's deck list actually has a lot more traps than the typical Mermail Atlantean deck, but the fact that I went first, won the die roll, was really great, and you'll actually see that here as Pack ends up setting 2. Now on my turn, I have the opportunity here to flip Giargia Armor, which is great. It means it survived the possibility of being hit by Marksman on the first turn. Shows me that he doesn't have Gen X Undyne, and because he doesn't have Gen X Undyne, I decided to search out a Giargia Arsenal. The reason I searched Giargia Arsenal is Armor can't search Armor, but Armor can search Arsenal, which then can search another Armor itself. And the fact that he was unable to deal with the set Armor on the first turn suggests to me that he'll have a very difficult time dealing with 2 Armors on the next turn. So here I decide to attack with the Giargia Arsenal first. It's boosted up to 1900. I do this because it's a good indication now if he actually does have the Spear, which he ends up activating. I think for a moment, and I have a decision here because now that I'm rewatching this, the third backcard that I have is Bottomless Trap Hole, and I have the opportunity here to Wiretap or Bottomless Trap Hole, and I decide to Bottomless Trap Hole. That way I can use the Wiretap on his other theoretical trap card if it actually is something defensive. I know he likes to have, as I mentioned before, way more traps than the typical Mermail deck, and if I Bottomless here, it guarantees that I can Wiretap something like a Mirror Force. So this ensures that I push through for a lot of damage, and then in the battle phase, after I attack with the Arsenal and the Armor, I end up flipping Giargia Gear. This ended up being a slight mistake. I should have used this earlier because Giargia Arsenal actually boosts by 200 for every gear on your board, and I could have got 400 more damage in by boosting the Arsenal by 200 for each of the Giargia Gears that I end up summoning, or the Giargianos. I end up doing this so that I can go into Abyss Dweller in main phase 2 and then set both of the Armors. The Giargia Gear special summons 2 level 3 gears from your deck. In this deck, the only options are MK2 and then the original gear, Giargiano. And then what I do here is I attack for 15, 500, and 1000 with the 2 level 3s, which are technically level 4s because of the trap card. And then in main phase 2, I'm going to go into Abyss Dweller and then set the Armor. In retrospect, as you'll see, Pack has a really good counter to this play, and we'll talk about that when it happens. But you'll see me here think about it for a little while and then really kind of settle on the decision. You know what? He's running Mermails, Atlanteans. He passed with just 2 trap cards, so he might be in a relatively weak position, so the Abyss Dweller here is really good. And then I elect to tribute off the Arsenal to go into a second Armor. I could have put the 2 Armors into a Giargian X and searched a follow-up, which would have played around the card that Pack actually ultimately ended up having, but I'll let this play out for a little bit and then I'll talk about it. So you'll see here I go into Dweller, and then I end up passing with the wiretap set. So the Abyss Spear dies during the end phase. I end up Dwellering in standby phase, and you'll see Pack here ends up flipping one of his defensive trap cards, which was one of the main reasons I left the wiretap set and used Bottomless on the Lind as opposed to the wiretap. But you'll end up seeing here Pack had the perfect counter to this. He ends up Dark Holing here, which is an interesting one because, you know, if Pack knew actually 100% what I was running, he probably would have Dark Hold on the first turn. I didn't tell him I was running Gears ahead of time. This format, you could conceivably see, I'm actually going to pause this video here so I can talk about this. You could actually conceivably see somebody sets one of the hands on the first turn, and Darkle actually plays around that too. So should I have been able to read that he did not have Dark Hole or did have Dark Hole there is a little bit debatable. One of the things I could have done in retrospect was make it so that I kept one of the armors, I sent both of the armors away for Geargia and X and searched a follow-up. One of the benefits to that is because I searched Giorgiano off the Geargia gear, the best target to revive off a Geargia X that leaves the battlefield was actually in my graveyard. You like having Giorgiano, the original one, in the graveyard, because if you have the opportunity on the following turn, if it actually survives the full turn, you can tribute it off and special summon. Generally accelerated from the graveyard. I probably would have ended up searching an accelerator off the Geargia X. This is an interesting debate here because he couldn't deal with an armor on the first turn. The only card he really could have used to deal with the clear indication that I have double armor was Dark Hole, and it ended up being quite the blowout here. It's an interesting decision point because there's only one Dark Hole in the format. This isn't modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Where there's Regeki and multiple Dark Holes, and under Abyss Dweller, he really can't deal with those armors. So we'll end up seeing how this works out, but the fact that I didn't have any more defensive cards other than the wiretap, maybe I should have went into the Geargia X to guarantee that I had the follow-up because I had the Dweller to protect me, all things considered, anyway. And that way, if he has the Dark Hole, it's not a complete and total blowout. So this could have easily been a mistake. I'm not sure I should have been able to read one way or the other if he had Dark Hole, because not knowing what I was running, it's not a guarantee that he would have used Dark Hole. Had we been playing a bunch already that night, and this was our first match, when I set a monster, he's going to Dark Hole because Accelerator can't recur itself. There's nothing that I would have been able to send to the graveyard to get card advantage and to sort of -1 his Dark Hole. He would just Dark Hole a set armor if he doesn't have access to Marksman there. So it's a little bit of a debate, an interesting decision point though in retrospect. So let's see what ends up happening here. Pack ends up going Abystius, send Abystius, and I actually have Maxi, which is awesome here. That's not a ton of card advantage for him because he's not sending something like Dragoon, so he ends up just searching a Lind and then attacking with the Lind and passing here, not wanting to play under Dark Hole, which is really good. He ended up setting all of his trap cards the previous turn, so he doesn't have any more Abyss Spears. I elect to set a back row, 2 back rows, and a monster passing back here. If I recall correctly, I set a Accelerator. So what he's going to end up doing here is attacking into the Accelerator, and I end up searching the armor, right? He didn't have an out to armor on the first turn, so I presume this armor is going to be really powerful here again. I could have searched the Accelerator to then tribute off to search the last armor out of the deck, but I actually think armor is a pretty reasonable draw, and I'm not going to be attacking over the Lindy anyway. So here's the decision: where do I search out the Accelerator from the grave, or the Arsenal from the graveyard, the Lone Fire effect, or do I search out the Geargia armor? And after quite a bit of decision, even at 2x speed, I do in fact search an armor, and he passes back. So this is a good indication to me that this armor might actually end up doing a lot of work, right? He's had several draw phases, but he's exhausted Dark Hole. He didn't have the ability to Marksman earlier. Presumably, he would need to have drawn multiple cards to be able to do that since this point. So at this point, I'm actually pretty confident that this Geargia armor is going to do a lot of work. And when he shifts this Lindy to defense, I feel great about this. I really realize this is a great opportunity here to generate a lot of card advantage through this armor. I can just utilize this armor over the course of the next couple turns, build up card advantage. This deck has access to Emerald, which is what I'm actually checking right now, in order to ensure that I can put the Dweller back into my extra deck so that I can summon it on a subsequent turn and make it so that he has to deal with both of them. I wiretapped the Breakthrough skill, which means it's not in the graveyard to negate the Dweller in his turn, so that makes me feel really confident about setting up a turn later on in the game where I can use the Diagusto Emerald in combination with the Dweller into my graveyard. Here I end up searching an Arsenal, and I figure, you know what, he couldn't deal with armor last turn, let's try and do the thing that I tried to do a couple turns ago and go double armor. There's a little bit of a discussion here. Should I have left one of the armors in defense mode? Now, he clearly didn't have Marksman on the previous turn, but there are some indications, there's some possibility with this deck, so I'll stop here and talk about this, where he might not have Marksman, but there's the question, do you play around Marksman and Infantry? Because there's this interesting decision point where sometimes you leave it face up in defense mode because you can flip it face down and flip it face up on your turn. Yes, it leaves it in face up attack position, but it makes it so that you play around marksman. It's destroyed by infantry, which there's really been no point where he could have used infantry. Obviously, this isn't one of those scenarios based on this current game state where I should leave the armors face up, but I really like pointing that out, that sometimes you can play around marksman by keeping it face up, although that does leave you vulnerable to infantry. This, because he was unable to destroy the set armor on the previous turn, is not one of those scenarios, but I actually think it's worth commenting. So here he summons Controller, and this is a naturally drawn controller. He's yet to use Undyne. Here I have some decisions to make because he has access to Leo using the level 7, so I end up having to book a moon here. I think this is really awesome for me because if he passes back again, which he did on the previous turn, it really shows he's quite vulnerable. That was a play he could have made on the previous turn, just summoning that controller. So for here, I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to get double armor effect. I'm in really great position. I'm generating a ton of card advantage. You can't deal with these consistent streams of card advantage. So you'll see here, I end up making 2 searches. I get Accelerator and MK2. Sometimes you don't want to search the MK2 because it makes your Geargia gears dead, but you do have access to Daigusto Mermail, and you'll see here, this is really what I'm just thinking about. Is this a turn where I want to make a big push? You'll see me think about this for quite a bit of time. I end up summoning Trap Turk's Mermelio, searching out a Trap Turk Trap Hole Nightmare. I already used my bottomless Trap Hole, so this is my only target. And then here's the big decision point. Do I make a big aggressive push, or do I pass one more turn and play passively? No matter what, I need to attack the controller. There's no debate about that. And I elect here to start making an aggressive push. So I go into the Daigusto Emerald in order to put back the Dweller. At this point, I remember my hand had something like double Accelerator and MK2. So I've already sort of gathered enough of the pieces necessary to make an aggressive push. And at this point, I recall I've drawn into another Geargia gear, so I actually want to put back the gears into my deck. You'll notice I sent back the Geargianos and the Abyss Dweller here, making it so that on the subsequent turn, I can make a push backed up by Dweller and backed up by Geargia gear. So that's why one of the main reasons here I decided to invest my Geargia armors into a Daigusto Emerald. And here I make another aggressive push. I end up going into the Geargian X that I talked about a little bit earlier. I'm able to search out a copy of Accelerator. Now the Accelerator can summon out, and I can go into the Abyss Dweller and essentially clear his field here. You'll notice I end up going into the Abyss Dweller. The Abyss Dweller pops, kills, and I'm leaving him now with the Abystius under Abyss Dweller. I don't think there's really much he can do because he's already used his Dark Hole. I've got 3 trap cards. One of them is Geargia gear. So the way I actually win on the following turn is really interesting. So I'll let it play out. But it's actually a pretty interesting iteration on the following turn. One of the possibilities that could prolong the game is him using Lindy on the following turn, because I've used my Abyss Dweller, but you'll actually see I have that covered. I have a cool Dark Hole play that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. So here he summons Undyne. Undyne's a sort of a whatever. Whatever he sends isn't going to get the effect. Though I do have to start to consider how many waters he has in the graveyard, because Moulin Glacier could interrupt some of the plays that I was thinking about. In retrospect, I know I end up winning on the following turn. It may have been a good point of discussion to set the spell card that I use on the following turn, actually to play around Moulin Glacier, though he would actually have had to naturally draw Moulin Glacier because he can't search it off of the Dragoons here due to the effect of Abyss Dweller. He ends up sending Tidal, which is fine. Again, with Abyss Dweller, that's not a big deal. You'll actually see him try to summon the Tidal in just a moment, and then we both catch that, oh, wait, you can't do that. I'll reveal the fact that I have a Maxi in my hand before it actually occurs, but that's okay. The Maxi, all things considered, it ends up being irrelevant, right? You'll see I show Maxi, oh wait, never mind, you can't summon that. I'll bring the Maxi back. And this is really, it starts to be put into context here that this game is close to over, though this Soul Charge could have been big. Let's see what ends up happening here. Soul Charge for 2 drops him down to 15. That's going to be an important number. On the following turn, the play that I make, 15 is actually the quantity of life that I can deal. So that'll be really useful to note. Here he has the ability to go into Big Eye, Draco Sack, but going into 3 back rows is obviously really hard. I know one of those back rows is a Geargia gear, which isn't particularly useful here. So you'll see here Pack considering his options. He has a rank 3 play and a rank 7 play. Obviously, he can go Lindy and Undyne into something like Zenmaines, though the Lindy itself is really useful depending on what type of level 7s he plays. I don't think he plays Abyss Lead, but as the board is currently constituted, I can't just attack into Lead or Lindy because he could summon Abyss Lead, which would have more attack than all of my monsters. So I am put into a position while I'll need to on the following turn make a play. He ends up passing here with this board, and you'll end up seeing here how I end up winning, right? He decides not to make the push of going into a rank 7 or a rank 3 and ends up deciding, you know what, the Abyss Dweller's effect is gone. I'm just going to establish a big board and hopefully survive. The way I end up winning here is actually kind of interesting. There may have been an easier path to victory, but I do something that's a little bit convoluted. You'll see me here checking the text of a few cards. I utilizing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Neuron app quite frequently during this match. So I actually end up making the play, think I made a mistake, take it back, and then ultimately realize, no, I didn't make a mistake. So first I'll use the accelerator effect. I'll use the Geargia X to put the accelerator back into my hand. You'll see why that's useful. Then I used Augusto Emerald to shuffle back in a couple pairs of Max C and another monster. I think it was a Giorgiano, and I draw a card. Now I'll summon out the MK2, and I'll use MK2's effect to summon an accelerator from the graveyard, and then that allows me to summon a Giorgiano, which is the Pseudo's Tour Guide effect. Now I have a Zenmains on the field. Right, so I have to worry about Lindy here, summoning a monster, but you'll see I actually have a way of dealing with it. So I'll go into, as I alluded to before, Zenmains. This is me realizing I think I made a mistake. Wait a minute, I have to take that back. Crap. Nope, I'll realize very soon after, no, I got it. I take a few things back, think about it for a second, and I realize I did have a way of winning. You'll notice in just a few moments, I ultimately end up winning this game with Dark Hole. And the reason I thought I made a mistake is I didn't end up having a level 3 in the graveyard. Watch, so I go here into Zenmains and I end up shooting it off. Then I end up summoning this is important, the Giorgiano off of the Geargia X effect, right? When Geargia X leaves the battlefield, you get to special summon a level 3 Giorgiano from your graveyard. The Giorgiano itself, the natural one, is the best one because you contribute it off to special summon a level 4 from your graveyard. And you'll notice here, I'm able to detach a Giorgiano off of the Zenmains. That's where I thought I made a mistake, because I checked my graveyard and I shuffled back Giorgiano with the Daigusto Emerald thinking, oh no, now I don't have this in the graveyard. But then I realized, oh, wait a minute. This level 3 Giorgiano that I need to recur off the Geargia X is going to the graveyard because Zenmains has to detach in order to survive the Dark Hole. And that's when I realized the play sequence that I thought about originally was actually totally fine. So you'll notice here the Dark Hole goes off. The Lindy goes off. He summons out the Pike. He decides he can't use the effect because he knows I have Trap Trick Trap Hole Nightmare set over here to the left. He ends up then realizing he's going to go into Abystius. At this point, I was pretty confident he wasn't playing Abyss Lead. I've played against Pac a few times, actually in person, against his Mermail deck, and I've never seen him play Abyss Lead. So this ends up being important. And if he went into Abyss Lead, it wouldn't matter because you'll notice here, because I went into the Giorgiano, I contributed off for a level 4. And then I had access to the accelerator that I searched off the Geargia X earlier. And now you'll see I go into Karen Gorgon, the 2450 attack monster, which has just 50 attack points higher than the Mermail Abystius. So I can attack over, and then the 15 directly with Zenmains is perfectly game. And I actually commented on that I could have went into Honor Arc if he went into Abyss Lead in attack mode, so it didn't really matter what he summoned off of the Lindy. So it was really kind of convoluted way of winning there, utilizing Dark Hole with your Zenmains to detach, put the Giorgiano into the graveyard, so the Geargia X resolved. Obviously very convoluted, but it exactly won the game here. So really interesting game. I'm kind of talking about some of the plays I could have made. I'm talking here about potentially going into Rhapsody to boost the attack of my Geargia X to attack over the Undyne that he had, but I wasn't able to put 2 level 4s on the board the previous turn, or earlier in the turn. But that was really interesting game 1. I will fast forward a little bit through the side decking, and we'll see what happens in game 2. So obviously Pac is going to go first here in game 2. We are playing draw 6. There's no reason to go second. I think you'd go first anyway, even if you're drawing 5. Here in this game, I have a couple of floodgates. We did play with full side deck, so drawing something like D-Fissure or Macrocosmos would obviously be really powerful, but we'll see what ends up happening. Pac has a pretty passive opening with just 1 set back row, but the difference here is Wiretap is not nearly as good going second, because if he has just this card here, he has the ability to break up some of my plays. I end up summoning Accelerator and attacking. I'm not going to attack into the Abyss Lind. He could discard a Atlantean Infantry off of a Pike. There's no point in doing that. So here I do have to make the decision, though. I will actually make a comment here about this, though. There is a discussion here about attacking. If I were to attack, if he had Marksman and not Infantry, it does disrupt overall his play sequence. During the end phase of the turn, this Lindy is going to die off the Abyss Spear, and he's going to summon Pike, and Pike is going to discard. If his discard is infantry, it blows me out. If his discard is marksman, it actually makes sense to attack here. So in retrospect, maybe I should have attacked and risked that he had marksman and not infantry, because it's way more likely that he would be comfortable making a set Abyss Spear play if he actually had marksman and not infantry. So there's a little bit of a discussion now that I'm rewatching this of maybe the right play would have just been to attack here. I end up making the more, in the moment play that I think made sense, but in retrospect, maybe I should have just attacked. I'll go here into armor, set the armor, and then set a bunch of back rows, but you'll actually see that maybe the correct play was attacking. Oh, rather, I ended up going into Abyss Dweller. Yeah, I remember this. I end up Abyss Dwellering, that way the Lindy doesn't go off, and now I have Abyss Dweller on the board, and I immediately Dweller again. There's some discussion to not Dwellering immediately, but I think overall it's probably fine. He ends up setting a back row. Now that I realize, just to talk about it a little bit more, I had Accelerator in retrospect. It was probably fine, but there is a discussion there. It is a real discussion as to whether or not just attacking the Lindy was proper and then telling him it's marksman. If marksman's in your hand, it's a really inadequate discard off your Pike, and to say it's infantry or bust, or I guess dragoons and bust. Interesting. Anyway, so he ends up soul charging. I remember this. He ends up soul charging for Lyn and setting some back rows. It's passing to me. Of course, my Dweller's no longer live, so that's not super ideal. I do have an MK2 though, which is a pseudo tour guide here because I can summon out an arsenal. He uses breakthrough skill. That breakthrough skill ends up being really important because I end up forgetting that it goes to the graveyard later on in this game. I'll already comment on that now. But now I'm in sort of a little bit of an awkward position here. I have to set another back row. Pass to, take it back, think about it. Oh, I remember, that was a Geargia gear, and I think to myself, if this ends up dying in a really inopportune way, that's really inconvenient, but it's probably one of the best cards I have to come back if Pac were to make a play. And I actually remember I had 2 Geargia gears in this game, so I was thinking there, do I set the second copy? At least that's what I recall. Here in Undyne's really bad for me. Undyne is just such a power card. Obviously, I was probably able to stymie that with Dweller the previous turn, but seeing in here, it's really rough. He searches a marksman, he searches a controller, and now his Abyss Lind is really good. There's a discussion as to whether or not maybe I should have shifted the Dweller to defense mode to make it so that he can't crash the Lindy into it, but he has Abysstius anyway, so that doesn't end up mattering, though I, again, probably could have done that a little bit better. He ends up destroying a Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare. Unfortunately, back in the day, Abysstius' effect was a requirement, so you could actually orchestrate your chains such that Marksman is chainlink 2 and Abysstius is chainlink 1, and you can't use Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare on a Marksman effect. It obviously has to be done on Abysstius, and the chainlink is structured in such a way that you don't have the opportunity to do that. I'm actually reading the effect of Abysstius right now. Neuron app is going to tell me the opposite, but I then recall, and Pat comments on it, that the errata that made this play illegal or made it such that this play wouldn't work occurred years later. So in the moment, he's actually able to destroy my Traptrix Trap Hole Nightmare, leaving me, I know, here with the Geargia gear set. Then he ends up summoning Megalo after ditching summoning the Lindy and crashing that to go into the Megalo. So maybe I should have, as I commented on before, put it into defense position. He ends up here going into Abyss into Draco Sack, detaching the token, summoning 2 more tokens, popping my back row. And see here, this is where I played the Geargia gear. I was reluctant to set it on that previous turn because, maybe post Marksman I'd be confident, because had he hit this with Marksman, I would be in really bad shape here because he would have attacked over these, at least in main phase 2. If he's unable to destroy these, I might actually have a play. So he sets another back row, and I have 2 level 4 Geargianos now, which gives me some flexibility. You'll see the play that I make takes advantage of the fact that they're level 4s. Pac's debating, does he want to set that other card? He starts to calculate how many cards do we have. In this format, the big level 4 monster that you have to worry about, see that he asks how many cards I have in hand, then he ends up taking back his set, realizing that I'm in Exciton Knight range. Exciton Knight is a really powerful rank 4. If you're a modern Yu-Gi-Oh player, it's basically I don't want to say the original Zeus, it's almost the second version of Zeus. If the first version of Zeus is Black Rose Dragon, Exciton Knight is the second iteration of that type of effect. It's a rank 4 where if you have less cards in your possession, that means hand and field, than your opponent, you can quick effect detach during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase to basically Zeus the board. Though not send, destroy all cards on the field that are not itself. I actually have to use the effect twice because Draco Sack is being protected by the fact that it has a token. That's what I'm reading here on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Neuron app. So I end up going here into Exciton, and it's not once per turn effect, so you can in fact do this twice. So I count that I have 3 in hand, I detach, I blow up the board, everything but the Draco Sack. Pack thinks about it for a second. He decides to end up lancing, and then it doesn't really matter. I'm going to end up doing the effect anyway. With Exciton, it stops your opponent from taking damage for the rest of the turn, so it doesn't really matter if he uses it on my Exciton to reduce my Exciton attack. I'm not dealing damage this turn anyway. And then here I kind of look through my options and debate, where are we going to go? At this point, I have a Soul Charge in my hand, which is really awesome. That was one of the main things I was just thinking about the previous turn with the Giargia Gear. If this Giargia Gear survives, playing Giargia Gear and Soul Charge in the same turn can obviously turn the game around, but if that Giargia Gear gets destroyed prematurely, I'm going to be in really rough shape. Maybe there's a point of discussion where I use the Soul Charge to pop the board and then set Giargia Gear as the follow-up, but it ended up working out where I got to resolve the Giargia Gear in main phase 2, the Gear survived, and now I have Soul Charge here in main phase 2. I end up summoning out essentially 4 level 4s. That Giargiano all the way to the left is the one that can tribute off and summon out a level 4. I end up making a mistake here, and you'll see that really quickly soon after. I end up going here into Emerald. That's fine, going into Emerald here. I shuffle back to Dweller. That's useful to have into the extra deck, but the mistake that I make is I go into Dweller thinking that that's actually a good play, not realizing that he has Breakthrough Skill in his graveyard. This is probably what ends up happening when you don't play a format live as frequently, and it's a mistake that, and honestly, is an amateur mistake. You should always be aware of cards like Breakthrough Skill, but the idea here is go into Dweller, and I'm in really good shape, right? He's going to have a hard time dealing with the Daigusto Emerald under Dweller. Unfortunately, he's not going to be under Dweller because of Breakthrough Skill. And then I realize here, oh yeah, I'm not in good shape anymore. Had that Dweller resolved and he not have Breakthrough Skill, I'd actually be in pretty good shape because that Emerald would probably resolve again, but, that's a mistake that I'm going to fully admit to making, and you'll see here that I get punished quite considerably for it, right? Gundy gets sent to the graveyard off of a pike, and this is where I start to realize that this game is definitely lost, and this is where I'm starting to look at my extra deck like, okay, had I not gone into Dweller, was there anything better I could have gone into? I think here I'm looking at Karen Gorgon's effect, thinking, well, is this a good choice? Probably not. I could have made it so that the Breakthrough Skill maybe targeted something else. I think that could have worked, but you'll see here Pack ends up going Lindy and then crashing it and summoning out a Abyss Turge. This is the one that allows him now to discard a Marksman to add an Undyne back to his hand. That's going to pop my back row, which is a Torrential Tribute. I could have Torrentialed, but I didn't think that was good value, right? He technically has to clear my board, which isn't impossible for him to do, but I want to make sure he finds a way of doing it before I prematurely just Torrential my whole field. Unfortunately, though, at this point, it's pretty likely that he's going to have access to Mooling Glacier, which is the card that'll really shift the game into his favor. But he's deciding here what rank 4 he wants to go into. He has a few good options. He ends up going into Daigusto Emerald. This is unfortunate for me because this is going to manipulate the quantity of waters in his graveyard in such a way that he'll be able to put himself to 5. And then Mooling Glacier is going to hit the last 2 cards in my hand. You can see him actually say, I'm going to hit you for 2 cards before even drawing. I'm going to, make him draw the card and confirm that that's what he wants to do. But yeah, this whole turn, I think, went downhill when I obviously went into Abyss Dweller. In retrospect, I'm not sure there was an Exceed monster that would have been better, per se. I am able to get off a Daigusto Emerald effect, though, so the game's not totally lost, right? He had to go into Mooling Glacier in main phase 2, so I do have the opportunity here to draw into something to get me out of this. And I still have a live Abyss Dweller. So here I can attack the Exciton over the Emerald, set a card. I still have Dweller live. I mean, it's not a complete loss of hope here. I end up Dwellering. And we'll see here if Pack can capitalize on what I have going on. He attacks over the Emerald and passes back. So if I could find an out to that Mooling Glacier, I'd be in good shape because then he'd miss a battle phase. But at this point, I'm shifting my monsters to defense position. It's not looking good. He ends up summoning another Abystius, discarding the Marksman. I use Fiendish Chain. That was a little bit lucky. He targeted the Fiendish Chain with the Marksman, and I was able to chain it on the Abystius. That's obviously best case scenario for me. Unfortunately, though, when he flips this controller, I have to... I need to stop this for a second. So I meant to Maxi off the Abystius. I was actually sort of excited that he Marksman targeted that. Obviously, I'm going to Maxi there. If I'm holding a dead Maxi, shifting all my monsters to defense position, it's self-explanatory that I would Maxi there. I just didn't flip it in time. So I get one draw, and he has to decide, does he actually want to continue making a push? He decides to summon Undyne and send Dragoon to the graveyard. That's the first time we've seen Dragoon the whole game. And now the Marksman gets special summon. Now he summons another copy of Abystius. He gets to destroy another back row. He's going to target the second Fiendish Chain, but unfortunately here for me, I get to draw, but it doesn't really matter. With only 400 life points, there's nothing that I'll be able to do. There are no hand traps that I could have access to. This game is over. So I think this game turned when I made that mistake in Breakthrough Skill, but hopefully here in Game 3, we'll be able to play a more clean game and not run into a Breakthrough Skill that's obviously in the graveyard. So I'll fast forward a little bit to our third game. You may have seen a little bit of a preview of how the Game 3 went, but I'll be able to go first now, which is obviously a massive advantage. I'll get to draw 6. Theoretically, I'll be able to respond better to the possibility of him having access to Spear Marksman. And you'll see that I actually end up drawing one of the Floodgates. I get to side in both Macrocosmos and D-Fissure in this matchup, and having, D-Fissure is absolutely game-breaking. If Pack doesn't have access to MST or some type of spell and trap card removal, his deck just simply can't function to a turn 1 D-Fissure. He looks at his extra deck, thinking to himself, can I go into Exciton Knight? Is there Diamond Direwolf? Is there any way that I can get rid of this D-Fissure? And unfortunately for him, you'll see that the D-Fissure is going to be the backbone of my Game 3 game plan here. So he ends up T-setting, passing over. And not only did I open D-Fissure, you'll see in a moment, I actually opened Armor D-Fissure, which is just absolutely game-breaking. Here I can search out I can do a few different things here. So I can search out Arsenal, which although it gets banished, allows me to summon another Armor. His deck is going to have a really difficult time dealing with Armor under D-Fissure. He basically needs that to be a Spear and have access to a monster that matches the level of what he summons off of Spear. Here I decide to go into Arsenal. Arsenal is going to have 1900 attack because there are 2 gears on the board. I can attack over whatever his set monster is, and then directly for 11. You'll see I end up killing a Marksman, hitting directly for 11. I can now think about my next play for a little bit. If I remember correctly, I have an MK2 in my hand. Yeah, that's why I end up going to a Geargia X. That way Arsenal, you'll see I specifically detach the Arsenal. That way it goes to the graveyard, so on the following turn I can use MK2 to recur that Arsenal and turn it into a tour guide. I was afraid that if I just tributed off the Arsenal and go into double armor, one of the ways I could lose is if he Dark Holes there, and then all of my guys get banished and I have a dead MK2. There was still a universe where I could lose this game if he were to top deck Dark Hole. By going into the Geargia X, I search an Accelerator, which acts as a follow-up, and I put the Arsenal in the graveyard so that the MK2 is live in my hand, by bare minimum turning into a pseudo tour guide effect. So yeah, he ends up scooping here, realizing that, I have a ton of card advantage. I have a Floodgate. There's really very little he can do. I show him that I have both Book of Moon and a Geargia gear. I could have made a bigger push with Geargia gear, but I figured, see if he draws Dark Hole. If he can't draw Dark Hole, I'm just going to kill him on the following turn with this, and he ends up scooping there. So unfortunately, Game 3 is not a terribly exciting game because of access to D-Fissure. We did, in fact, play another match, though, so if you enjoyed watching this, please comment down below. Give me some feedback. I have never done a live commentary over a game that I played a week ago. If this is something that you enjoyed, I'd be more than happy to go over the next match. I can already tell you ahead of time, I did not draw D-Fissure or Macrocosmos in the next match, so all of the games that we play are much more representative of fair Yu-Gi-Oh! Another really interesting match. I don't think I make any overwhelmingly clear and stupid plays like playing Abyss Dweller right into a Breakthrough Skill. So if you enjoyed watching this, please comment down below. Again, if you haven't already done so, if you have any interest in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, absolutely check out Pack's channel. I could not recommend it enough. As someone who's trying to get back into modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, I really enjoy watching his stream because he's very knowledgeable about modern Yu-Gi-Oh! He streams all different decks. It's not like he sticks to just one deck. It really allows you to get a better understanding of each of these decks. I remember a few weeks ago I watched him play adding Nisters, and I almost instantaneously, after just one stream, had a really good understanding of how that deck worked and where to hand trap it. So if you play modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I could not recommend his channel enough. But anyway, that's Giorlando for Yu-Gi-Oh history. Thank you for watching. Check back soon for plenty more Yu-Gi-Oh content.